Okay, here we go. Turns out that July 2nd is when the Continental Congress in Philadelphia declared independence. But then they had to put it into writing, or as we lawyers like to say, it had to be integrated into writing. So it took them 2 days to write because they didn't have artificial intelligence or even internet or even a typewriter. And they were still fighting. If you've ever seen the musical, they were still fighting between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and the people in South Carolina who were busy singing about rum. And so it took 2 days to finally get the thing written. So July 4th is when they signed it, but they declared independence on July 2nd. And it raises all kinds of questions that I mentioned to Olga. First of all, one of the great anomalies or divinely ordained things is that two of the central founders of the United States both died on the 50th anniversary of America. July 4, 1826. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died. That's amazing. In fact, there's a little bit of a legend that as John Adams was dying on the 50th anniversary of America, his last words were, "At least Jefferson lives." And part of the same Midrash is that as Jefferson was dying, his last words were, "At least Adam lives." So turns out they both died on the wrong day. They should have died 2 days earlier. Or at least, if you were doing it Talmudically, where there's always more than one opinion, one should have died on the 2nd and one should have died on the 4th. And then usually there's a third opinion. They both should have died on the 3rd. Anyway, enough about American independence, except for the fact that it's one of the greatest things that has ever happened to the Jewish people. And we thank God for America. God bless America, what America has done for the Jewish people and for all of the free world and all the world. Without America, who knows if Hitler would have been taken down? Besides the Jews, the rest of the world owes it. If it weren't for America, who knows if communism in the Soviet Union would have been taken down, and so on and so forth. It's a great, great country. Look at it. I don't want to use up all our time now, but it's appropriate. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should take out a few moments in this way to recognize this week of America's independence. Okay, that's number one. We're about to start now. We won't have class on Thursday because we hold 2 days of American independence in Gullus. It's the second day, the Orthodox practice of one day of these one-day festivals in Israel that are celebrated for 2 days in America. So we'll celebrate it on the 4th of July. Okay. Now I'm going to begin class. And as you know by now, we don't just use the text of Navi, of prophet, of Samuel, just as an excuse to get together. It's a serious Bible study. I mean, it is real Bible study. And at the same time, I'm a rabbi, and I teach Torah, and I teach Judaism. And in the course of teaching, why do we learn it? Why is it something different from learning American history? There are people who presumably get onto an adult class on the internet to continuing education to learn things like American history and other stuff. But why do so many of us do Bible study? Not only Jews, non-Jews, Christians of all different denominations. Why do we do Bible study? To learn to connect with God. And part of it is learning the story. But if you're just learning it for the story, it's not quite the name of the game. There's also substance. We're about to learn chapter 6 tonight. And if tonight proves like most other lessons, it'll take more than one class to do all of chapter 6. We often get into many commentaries, and I've already prepared more than there will be time in one class. And in doing chapter 6, it also is necessary to take out a few moments, not only as background, but to teach on a deeper level. And by the way, for those of us who might not be of the Jewish faith and still participate in the class, some of us are in that category, I believe this has meaning for all of us who are religious. Some of it is unique to the nuances and the craziness of some Jews, but perhaps it applies to others as well. The theme of chapter 6, and it's Without the introduction, it's utterly shocking. With the introduction, it makes more sense, but it's still shocking. What is going to happen in chapter 6, spoiler alert, is that David, having now moved his monarchy, his throne from Hebron, where he's been 7.5 years, he's now moved to Jerusalem, where it's going to be for the next 33 years. And we've been learning that, how he moved to Yerushalayim after the death of Ishbosheth, and we learned all that. And then they took down the Yevusim, the Jebusites, thereby clearing out Jerusalem. And now he's moving to Jerusalem. And the next step is to bring the Aron Brit Hashem, the Ark of the Covenant, to Jerusalem. And then to build the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash. So they're step by step. And it's actually going to become, we're going to learn, God is going to tell him, you will not have the opportunity in your lifetime to build the temple. Your son, Solomon Shlomo, will build the temple. You will not build it. And we'll learn it later on more. But briefly, the rabbis debate, why wasn't David the most holy and beloved of God, of everybody, the progenitor of Messiah? Why wasn't it God's will that he build the temple? And among other reasons, David had blood on his hands, legitimate blood, killing Goliath, killing Philistines to protect the Jewish nation. He had no choice. Nevertheless, God wanted the one who built the Beit HaMikdash to be someone who never had killed, even legitimate killing. Second reason, an alternative reason, it's kind of the other way, is that God knew that eventually the Jews would sin and the punishment would entail the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, the Churban Bayit. And it would happen twice, the first temple by the Babylonians and the second temple by the Romans. And that it was God's perception that if David would build the temple, it would be impossible for God to ever allow the temple to be destroyed. Not a temple built by David. Therefore, it would have to be built by someone other than David, so that there would be an opening if God felt it necessary to destroy it. Because a temple built by David would be eternal and permanent. Okay. So the temple has not yet been built. The capital is now being moved to Jerusalem. And the next step is to move the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron Brit Hashem. And what is going to happen is that there's going to be an extraordinarily joyous, celebratory move of the Aron Brit Hashem towards Jerusalem. But along the way, there's going to be a little bit too much frivolity, and someone is going to die because of the frivolity. And I want to take a moment before we learn it in the text. We live, many of us in America, some of us in Israel, and are here from other, sometimes we have somebody from Australia or from England, South Africa, but most of us are from America and a few of us from Israel. And this is, when I say this, also for those that are going to catch up later on the post on the YouTube. And in today's world, particularly in America, there's both hefker, chaos, and there's a great lack of awe, A-W-E. Again, I spell words sometimes because my Brooklyn accent, I want to be clear. If I say awe, I mean A-W-E, not O-R or O-A-R. There's a lack of awe in America. There's a lack of respect in America. The way we talk about the president, even those who are about their wits. The way we have cartoons making fun of political figures. We mock the fact that children in school, when they're scolded, now respond to the teacher, my mom is going to sue you. You say that one more time, my parents will have you in court. The way students can run rampant on college campuses, and the deans are the ones who have to apologize instead of kicking them all out. And so on and so, people getting arrested in the streets and not being held even when they're convicted, being given a second, third, there's chaos. When my son, Aaron, was a little boy, our neighbor, Morty Bresnik, so Aaron was going to ask something of the neighbor, and he started to ask Mr. Bresnik, and the guy said, don't call me Mr. Bresnik, call me Morty. And I told my son, as my father had taught me when I was a boy, Mr. Bresnik means well when he says call him Morty. You call him Mr. Bresnik. Until you're older than he is, he's Mr. Bresnik. He is never Morty to you. I call him Morty. But you know what? He doesn't call me Dov. He calls me Rabbi. We call people by the title that is appropriate to them. We're not that casual. Here in California, chaos. Everybody's on a first name basis with everybody. No one stands up to give a seat to an 80-year-old man or woman on a park bench. It's chaos. The Torah anticipates and requires that we honor elders and we have awe in the presence of God. One of the problems the Orthodox Jewish community has, I don't think Christians have it, and I know Reform doesn't have it. I don't think conservative has too much of it. People talk in shul in a lot of congregations, not in all, but in too many. During prayer service, if you've never been in an Orthodox service, it may shock you to know that amid prayers, people are sitting near each other in the men's section talking about the stock market or the local sports scores, and in the women's section talking about the latest fashions. If that sounds sexist, I'm just calling it as it is. The women aren't talking stock and the men aren't talking fashions. And the rabbi every so often has to actually stop prayer services and say, quiet, please. Quiet, please. And there's someone called the Gabbai. It's hard to describe. It's like a deacon. And his job is just to walk around the shul telling people to be quiet. I grew up in a shul like that. And then when our family moved, we went to another shul like that. And many people today talk because they saw their parents talking. Like that's what you do in a shul during prayer services. It's extraordinary. Now, there are a lot of shuls that's inconceivable. It is my impression, I've never been to a church service, it is my impression people don't talk in church from what I've seen in the movies and also in Reform temples. I once spoke to a rabbi I deeply respect who was the rabbi of the shul when I was growing up. I said, Rabbi so-and-so, why do so many people in our shul talk when we're praying to God to give us health and to protect us? They don't do that, I don't think, in the Reform temples. I've never been in one, but I'm told they don't do that. And he knew I was right, but he didn't want he wanted to find a zechut, a merit, to defend the members of his congregation to an idealistic boy who cared about things. I remember he said to me, Rav Dov, I wasn't a rabbi yet. Reb is, you could also refer to Tevye, the milkman, as Reb. It's like a Yiddishism for Mr. Rav Dov. Have you ever gone to a theater? Yes, Rabbi. You ever hear people talk in a theater? No. Have you ever gone to a baseball game? Yes. You ever hear people talking at all the time? He says, you know what the difference is? What? When people go into the theater, they're being entertained by professional entertainers. When they go to a baseball game, it's like they feel it's their home. It's their park. It's their team. That's what it is. When they go to a Reform temple, they don't know how to pray. They don't pray. They truly do not pray. Most of them can't even read Hebrew. They sit down politely and they listen to a professional cantor sing like they're at the opera. And the opera performance goes on. And when the opera performance is over, they go home. And the opera is accompanied by an organist, and then they go home. So it's like the theater to them. They go to be entertained. And when they go to an Orthodox shul, it's like they feel at home. They talk. It's their shul. Like Yankee Stadium, I was in New York, like Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium. It's their ballpark. It still doesn't work. And one last word on that. When I was rabbi, in one shul particularly, when I was rabbi in a shul, wherever I was rabbi, there was no talking. There was no talking. Services would always be dignified. And I found I had a true soul partner in my wife, Rebbetzin Ellen Zichron Levracha. She was cooked at and baked out of the same stuff, and she couldn't tolerate it either. and we wouldn't put up with it. It was my job as rabbi to implement it, but we both had the same mindset, to the degree that we were prepared to lose members in the shul. Anyone who talked too much, out they go. We had one guy, we really liked the guy, but he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He had oral diarrhea. Nothing would work. They did not make an oral Imodium for him. And he would come in a congregation where nobody talked during services, and he'd sit down, whoever he was near, and he'd start talking, and people would be embarrassed. They wouldn't want to, but after 20, 30 minutes, they would get into a conversation with him. And he started ruining my congregation. And he didn't even mean it. He just couldn't shut up. And then he started the next thing during the Haftarah. Too much time to talk about it now, but the Haftarah is a much less important part of the service that goes on for about 10 minutes after the Torah reading. He would just walk out of the shul during those 10 minutes, just walk out. And he didn't like to be alone, so he always would induce someone to walk out with him so they could talk. And next thing I knew, we had half the congregation walking out during the Haftarah. And we decided we had to get rid of him. And we got rid of him. Of all things, we were giving him $10,000 a year charity. He couldn't pay his bills. It was secret. Nobody knew. So we cut off the charity. That was it. Cut off the charity. 3 weeks, explained, don't have charity for him anymore. Got rid of him without ever telling him why we got rid of him. We'd already asked him 400,000 times, stop talking in shul and stop walking out during Haftarah. And before you knew it, no one was talking anymore. No one was walking out during Haftarah, and we had my dream shul again. And so with that as background, we now go into this chapter 6, understanding that the Holy One, blessed be He, God, must be approached with reverence and awe. And his Aron Kodesh, his holy ark, all the more so. If you've ever been in a proper synagogue, again, I don't know what goes in church, but if you're, and definitely doesn't go on in a Reformed temple. If you've ever gone to a proper Orthodox synagogue, there are 2 or 3 points during the service where individuals are honored, called up to the front, either to open the ark so that the Torah can be taken out, or to open the ark at the end so the Torah can be put back. When you're called up to open the ark, after you open it, the custom is, when you're going back to your seat, the custom is you don't just turn around and walk back to your seat. The custom is, facing the ark, you walk backwards between 4 and 8 feet, 4 cubits. And only when you're beyond the 4 cubits distance do you then turn around and walk back to your seat. In showing deference and reverence before God, you don't just turn your back on God. It's understood you have to turn around at some time, but within the 4 cubits of the Aron, you go back, and it's a big thing. And you'll see it if you've never been to an Orthodox synagogue, it might surprise you. You'll have to have reverence. And if you've ever seen a Torah reading, you're not allowed to touch the Torah. The scroll, the person who's called and honored with the opportunity to stand while it's read, and the one who reads is not allowed to touch the Torah scroll. An amazing thing. If you've ever been to an Orthodox synagogue, the man who reads from the Torah, the Baal Kriya, usually in my shul would be has a long metal, either made out of silver or chrome, to look like silver, a sort of long hand. It's like a long metal rod, and at the end there's like a little hand with 4 fingers rolled, and a 5th finger open, the pointer finger extended, and the reader holds the finger, the yad, it's called, the hand, so that finger follows along on the parchment, so that the reader does not touch the parchment. And then when you're rolling the scroll, sometimes for reasons that we don't have time now, you'll have to roll the scroll from one part, from like the book of Genesis, Bereshit, all the way over to Numbers, Bamidbar, or Devarim. You have to, like 15 minutes, roll the scroll. Like you'll see they use a talus, a prayer shawl, or a kerchief as they're rolling it so as not to touch the scroll directly. That's the kind of awe with which we have to treat it. So to touch the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron Brit Hashem, That would be sudden death. Just as the Torah tells us, if someone walks in the Holy of Holies, instant death. We saw in Parshat Shmini in the Torah that when Nadav and Avihu, the first two sons of Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the priest, walked in the wrong way, offered an unauthorized sacrifice, they died instantly. And that's shocking. You can't imagine that in the modern world. But that's what it was, particularly in biblical times when the connection and the proximity with God Almighty and prophecy was so close. That is the introduction to understand chapter 6. We're first going to read all of chapter 6, and then we'll have whatever time we have for commentary, and the next class or two, we'll go further into that commentary. As always, thank you very much for being here. Let's just get let's get the text up. Okay, as always. Hi. Okay. Let me just improve the sound. It should be good enough, but I hope it was good enough. Let me just do that. Share sound. Okay, and now let's go up. Hide the video panel and hide the floating meeting controls. Okay, here we go. Chapter 6, 2 Samuel, Shmuel Bet. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, sure. Now, modern day Israel, road signs. You've probably seen road signs like these all the time. There's a sign, if you go to the right, it'll take you to Jerusalem. You know how these anti-Semitic bastards talk about Israel being racist, apartheid? All Israeli street signs are in Arabic also. That's something for a country that's supposed to be involved in genocide, wiping out the Arabs, and apartheid, keeping Arabs out. All street signs are in Hebrew and in Arabic. Ha! They don't know. They don't care. Well, these signs are not only to Yerushalayim, but also to Kiryat Ye'arim. And by the way, in Israel, the letter K, usually on street signs, is based on the rule of international linguistics, where they use the letter Q instead of K. And so, okay, or OQ. Here we go. Oops, let's just find it quickly. And if we don't have it quickly, we'll get it not so quickly. We'll bring up Sepharia, and we'll bring up Tanakh, and we'll bring up Shmuel Bet, and we'll bring up chapter 6. Okay. Vayosef od David et kol b'chor b'Yisrael shloshim elef. Well, David now is moving from Hebron, up to Yerushalayim. David assembled all the men. He already had many thousands, and this is no longer David with 600 men in a small little private army, but it's the army of Israel. And he brings out 30,000 more men. I believe altogether he's got 90,000 now. Then David and all his troops set out from Baalim of Yehuda, which also it's called, Baalei Yehuda, to bring up from the Ark of God. That's the Ark of the Covenant. That's the same Ark that in silliness, fictional movies that Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, that's the Ark. That the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the Holy Temple, was quote unquote lost. And where is it? And so Indiana Jones, the great explorer, was looking for it. So they're bringing Ark of the Covenant, Ark of God, to which the name was attached. It's holy, holy, the name Lord of Hosts enthroned on the cherubim, the kruvim. There's a lot to say already in commentary, but I'll just go straight through. They loaded the Ark of God onto a brand new cart made of new wood. Agalah is a wagon, and conveyed it from the house of Avinadav, which is on a hill. And particularly Avinadav's two sons, Uzzah and Achio, guided the new cart. So the Aron Brit Hashem, the Ark of the Covenant, is on a wagon being led by basically bulls. They had like a team of bulls, not just horses, leading the wagon on which the ark, and there were two sons. One, Achio, was in the front in case there was a short stop to make sure the ark didn't topple forward, and Uzzah was on the side in case it might topple that way. They conveyed it from Avinadab's house on the hill, Uzzah walking alongside the ark of God, Achio walking in front of the ark. Meanwhile, David and all the house of it, this was an extraordinary moment. This is the entire nation was marching from, when we say the entire nation, not every last Jew in Israel, but a huge, huge amount of people were marching from the place where the ark was reposing onto Jerusalem for this great, great merriment celebration. And it was an extraordinary celebration. And they danced before the Lord. And they had all kinds of musical instruments of that time. In those days, they didn't have guitars or banjos. They had what they had then. Cypress wood instruments like blocks and lyres. It's a kind of a harp or string instrument, and harps, timbrels, like cymbals and sistrums and cymbals. And it was just an amazing thing. I'm just trying to think quickly of an example in our secular society, among not a Jewish thing, but just in general, where a huge population of thousands would be just marching with all kinds of celebratory instruments, a parade, like some kind of parade, like, I don't know, like when the astronauts first came back and had a ticker tape parade, or when a team wins the world championship in one of the sports like baseball, football, hockey, basketball, and the whole city comes out for a ticker tape parade. So this is a huge, huge parade with musical instruments and dancing, all the way, with the centerpiece being not a Cadillac open top limousine, but a wagon with the ark on it. And they came to the threshing floor of a place called Nachon, Gora Nachon. And what happened was it hit a bump in the road, and the oxen or bulls started to sway a little bit. They weren't really going to fall, but they lost their balance a little, which they corrected. But as they lost their balance, the wagon also started to lose a little bit of its balance, and it wasn't going to fall either. But the ark on top of it started a little bit toppling. And as it started toppling, when they came to the threshing floor, Uzzah reached out for the ark and grasped it to hold it, but the oxen had stumbled. The Lord was furious at Uzzah for touching the ark, and God struck him down on the spot, and he died there beside the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God. Vayicharaf Hashem ba'Uzzah, God was furious at Uzzah, Vayakehu sham ha'elokim al hashal. I want to just take one or two pictures I prepared, just to give you a little sense of it. Here's a picture. Let's see if I don't think there's a need to make it bigger, but let me just make it a little bigger. Okay. So there's a picture. Here they are, all joyously marching. They've got the ark. This is going to be later, by the way. This will be when the shofars, the trumpets come out, and the ram's horns, and when they start carrying it, and it no longer is going to be on a wagon, with David in front. And what happened, we just read about, was the tragedy of Uzzah. You've got the bulls were leading the wagon. The bulls slightly stumbled. The wagon slightly stumbled. The ark seemed like it might stumble. Uzzah touched it, and God struck him dead. And the way I introduced class tonight was to lay the groundwork for this. It's forbidden to touch the ark. I mean, yeah, life or death forbidden. It is forbidden in the time of the temple. It is forbidden to walk on the Temple Mount in the Holy of Holies, except for the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and only one time a year on Yom Kippur, and only during the service in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, in the Holy of Holies. Other than that, he also could die. And even when he's in there for the service, at the appropriate time, if he loses his focus for a moment and starts to think about other things, he'll be stricken dead in the Holy of Holies. And then there's the problem, no one else is allowed to walk in to the Holy of Holies ever. So how do you get him out? And there's a legend that he would go in with a long chain attached to his leg, so that if he would die in there, he could be pulled out. There are other opinions that's only a legend, and that there would be an exception who would be allowed to walk in to pull him out. Otherwise, you can't walk in there. Even without the ark, even without the temple nowadays, we just have that mosque polluting the Temple Mount. It is forbidden to Jews to set foot on the territory of the Temple Mount where the Holy of Holies was. And so there are many, many Jews, who, and including the greatest of rabbis, and someone like me who follows the greatest of rabbis, we won't set foot on the Temple Mount. As much as we want to assert and exemplify Jewish sovereignty over the Temple Mount, because it belongs to us. Har Habayit biyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. Nevertheless, many will not set foot up there because it's like life or death forbidden to set foot there. And there are others who believe that they follow rabbis who believe they have mapped out the exact spot on the Temple Mount where the Holy of Holies would have been. So they hold that you're not allowed to set foot there, but you could set foot in other places of the Temple Mount. But that's how serious this is. This is really, really serious. Not only that, but you have to be a Kohen or a Levi, even to carry the ark. A Yisrael, a non-Kohen, someone not from the tribe of Levi, a non-Levite is not allowed to carry the ark. And it's got to be carried, as that other picture showed you, it's got to be carried on the shoulders of 4 men from the tribe of Levi, having on their shoulders the poles, the rods, a rod on the left and a rod on there's like a little ring, a little brass ring in the front and back, and a rod goes through it. Same on the other side, and 4 people, each takes a shoulder on his assigned part of the rod, and that's how the Aron is carried, not in a wagon. So this is serious stuff. And he was struck dead. Okay, let's continue. David was distressed because the Lord had inflicted a breach upon Uzzah. The rabbis tell us that he was distressed, he was angry at himself because he had caused all of this through indiscretion. He should not have allowed a non-Levite. Uzzah was not a Levi. He should not have allowed a non-Levite to be carrying the ark. He should have required it be carried by Levites on their shoulders using the rods assigned, not on a wagon, other things. And so David was afraid of the Lord. He was afraid. He said, how can I let the ark of the Lord come near me? He said, oh my gosh. I mean, this ark might end up killing all of us. Do you remember, some of you who are with us have been with us for many months may remember, when the Philistines went to war way back in the time of, before King Saul, in the time of Shmuel, the prophet Samuel, and Eli the Kohen, the predecessor of Samuel. The Jews went to war with the Philistines, and the Philistines won. And the report came back to Eli the Kohen. He was sitting on a chair, and he was told, the Philistines just defeated Israel at war, and your 2 sons, Hophni and Pinchas, were killed at battle, and the Philistines took the ark. He fell backward on his chair, and he died. And then the Philistines had the ark, and plagues started befalling the Philistines, if you remember. They brought it into their temple, and the next day their god, mysteriously, they had a statue. It had fallen down and broke. And they didn't know what to make of it, and they put the statue back up and repaired it, and the next day it broke into more pieces. And they decided there's something about that Ark of the Jews, get it out of the church, out of the temple. And then it started to smite leaders of the different cities, if you remember, with hemorrhoids, if you remember that. And finally, the Philistines said, we're giving that Ark back to the Jews. We don't need this. And when they brought it back to the Jews were not, the first place they brought it to the Jews, they were not sufficiently filled with awe. They were just thrilled that they got the Ark back. And they started to make merry, and several of them died till they got the Ark to some other place. So the Ark is like serious. And David suddenly decided, I don't even think I want it in Jerusalem. I'd love to have it in Jerusalem, but I don't know. It could be perilous. So he decided, we can't have it in Jerusalem. So he was afraid. How can I let the Ark of the Lord come to me? Verse 10. So David would not bring the Ark of the Lord to his place in the city of David. Instead, he diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. To remind you, a Gittite comes from the city of Gath, the city that Goliath came from. City in Gaza, at different times under sovereignty of Philistines, at different times under Jewish sovereignty. Sort of like Alsace-Lorraine. Sometimes with Germany, sometimes France. They used to pass it back and forth. Kids in their elementary school would be learning German as their language, their mother tongue, and all of a sudden, next day, new textbooks, they'd be learning French. A year later, they're learning German. So that was like God. There were times it was Philistine, times it was Israel. So Obed-Edom grew up in the house of God. The Ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. Nobody died. Just the opposite. He was blessed with extraordinary divine blessings. The Lord blessed Obed-Edom, his whole household. The rabbis tell us, we'll come back to it when we have time to go to the commentators. The rabbis tell us that he, his wife, and his 8 daughters-in-law, he had 8 sons, all married. His wife and his 8 daughters-in-law all became pregnant during those 3 months with what turned out in each of those 9 cases to be sextuplets. And within a year, he went from like no kids to 6 kids and 48 grandchildren. And that was considered an extraordinary blessing. No greater blessing than to have children. Lots and lots of children. We know that in the Bible. Women would do anything to have children. And there was no greater blessing. Which doesn't mean that a woman who might not have children is less than blessed in different ways. But in the biblical sense, particularly, where few other productive opportunities existed for most women, they couldn't go out and become politically involved or career-wise. Their greatest productive contribution was having children. So that was his blessing. And it was reported to David, the king. Have you heard what's going on with Obed-Edom? God has blessed his home and all that belonged to him because of that ark. So David said, I guess the ark could be a good thing to have. Just got to know how to handle it. Thereupon David went and brought up the ark of God, not personally, because he's from the tribe of Yehuda, Judah, but through Levium, through Levites. He had the ark of God brought up from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David amid rejoicing. Back to the parade. When the bearers of the ark of the Lord had moved forward 6 paces, they offered sacrifices and gratitude, and David started dancing, and he says, Mecharker, he started wildly dancing. If you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, I'm not just talking about a hora, but if you've ever been to like an Orthodox yeshivish wedding, where you've seen the guys start dancing, the crazy kind of dancing that goes on in Orthodox weddings. So he started like crazy dancing. Again, by crazy dancing, I don't just mean like street dancing, but like those yeshiva dances. So he started mecharker, bechol oz lefnei Hashem, with all his strength. Thus David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord, Aron Hashem, shouting and blasting the shofar. As the ark entered the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, by now returned to David, as you know, at the time that Avner came over from the house of Ishbosheth, and part of that agreement was that Michal would be returning also. And she was sort of like the number one wife, having been returned, despite all his beloved wives and secondary wives. Michal remained the number one wife. And she was looking from an overlook like the balcony of their palace as he was coming in dancing wildly. And she looked out the window and saw King David leaping and hopping. Some translate mafazes as hopping, leaping, hopping, just wild dancing and whirling before the Lord. But Tivez lo beliba, and it caused her to have contempt for him. Not lifelong contempt, but she looked down on him. Lahavdil, it's not the same at all, but in the book of Esther, in the first chapter, King Ahasuerus Achashverosh starts drinking a lot at a big party, and next thing you know, he sends the word he'd like his beautiful, gorgeous wife, Vashti, to be brought in naked. So all the people of the kingdom, particularly the members of his officers of his cabinet, could see how beautiful she is. According to the rabbis, there was a big argument, which country, which empire has the most beautiful women. This one said the Babylonians have the most beautiful women. This one said the Persians. This one said the Medians. I once saw an episode of Larry David's Meshuggah Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he's in a Uber, and he gets into a big fight with the Uber driver who's from Romania. And the Uber driver says the most beautiful women in the world are in Romania. And Larry David, if you know that show, and you don't have to, it's probably not the most honorable thing for me to be saying I watch it. It's like an addiction. And you can't blame a person with an addiction, right? It's what we call the Hunter Biden defense. So anyway, he gets into a big fight. The women of Romania are not the most beautiful, and it becomes a big fight. The next thing you know, the Uber driver gives him a 1 on the rating, and now Larry can't get on Ubers anymore. So anyway, people got into a big fight at Achashverosh's table. Who are the most? He said, my wife is the most beautiful. And they said, prove it. I want her to come naked. And so she sent a message back, according to the Midrash, you should be ashamed of yourself. I am a descendant of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia. I come from a proud lineage. My father and grandfather would never do that. They knew how to hold their liquor. You're drinking? Look at the disgusting shame of yourself. You're making of yourself a fool of yourself by getting to this point. You can't hold your liquor. My ancestors could hold their liquor. I'm not going to show up. I'm not showing up at all. And she got executed. But with that as background, she gained such a contempt for her husband. That's the kind of contempt. It was a little bit different, of course, but that's the kind of contempt Michal felt at that moment for David. I'm shocked that you don't have the dignity that my father had in the house of Saul. In the house of Saul, my father was a dignified man. He was a king. He would never dance like that in front of people, much less in front of women, nor would anybody else in his household. He was a man who comported himself with dignity. In your own mind, think of the difference between, I don't know, let's keep the politics even. I've taken a shot or two at Biden, so let's take a gentle shot at Trump. Compare the dignity, the personal dignity, forget politics, the dignity of Donald Trump with the dignity of Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, who recently passed away, or King Charles, Prince Charles, whatever he's up to now, King Charles. You know how those British guys, they're like so dignified? They're so dignified. Like none of them seems like a person you would actually enjoy having as a friend. They're just too serious. They're too dignified. That's like a British thing. Stiff upper lip, stiff lower lip, stiff. By contrast, like Americans, how you doing, baby? Californians, see you for lunch tomorrow. Whenever I'll see you. Israelis, eh. So it's like different cultures. She developed a contempt for him. How dare you? I'm embarrassed for myself to be thought of as your wife. That's how he talked to King David. So he didn't like that. And he comes back and says, I'm not acting inappropriately. There's no limit to how wildly I would dance and celebrate God Almighty, Jerusalem, and the Aron Brit Hashem. And so as he's coming in and she sees him, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out the window, saw King David hopping and skipping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him for it. They brought in the ark of the Lord, set it up in its place inside the tent. This is in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount, but for reasons we'll learn in a future class, not in its permanent final spot on the Temple Mount, but somewhere on the Temple Mount. Meanwhile, temporary spot under a tent because the Holy Temple is not up yet, which David had pitched for it, and they offered sacrifices, and everybody was celebrating, and he gave everybody bread and cakes and raisin cakes, like party favors. Everybody went back home, and David went back home he was just in the greatest mood. It's like the greatest day in his life. He's had a lot of great days. He became king of Israel. He had peace. He became king of all of Israel. He gained access to all of Jerusalem. No more Jebusites. Now he's got the ark. Went home to greet his household. And Michal, his wife, daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, Ma nichbad hayom melech Yisrael. Oh, how honorable today is the king of Israel. Aren't you so honorable? Who has exposed himself today before the eyes of the women of Israel. Exposing himself, his skin, and like he was like a homeless guy in San Francisco, just like a bum. The translation not perfect, but based on what I just said. Oh, how the king of Israel has done himself honor today, exposing himself in the life of the slave girls of his subjects as one of the riffraff. David was shocked. Can you imagine the day, your happiest day, and your closest relative, your spouse, your parent, turning around and saying, you're disgusting, I'm ashamed of you? He answered, it was before the Lord God who chose me instead of your father and all his family and appointed me the ruler over the Lord's people Israel. Lifnei Hashem asher bachar bi me'avich umikol beito letzavot oti nagid alam Yisrael am Hashem al Yisrael v'sichakti lifnei Hashem. So I danced before the Lord God. Okay? And I will dishonor myself even more before the Lord God. And I will make myself even lower in my own esteem before the Lord God. And you don't respect me, and you look down on me with contempt, but among the slave girls, the women of Israel, about whom you speak, I will be honored. So to her dying day, Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children. It's chapter 6. Let's go into some commentaries, and we'll continue next week, God willing, and probably 2 weeks. Let's take a look. Baba Batra. They talked about the ark what was going on in that ark? I talked in the beginning a little bit about the ark, about about Indiana Jones and Lost Ark, and the Ark of the Covenant, how holy it is. So what's the deal with that ark? What made it so holy? And that's where we'll start with commentary. This is the Talmud, Bava Batra. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Meir, where were the silver columns placed outside the ark? And they then get into a discussion of the two tablets of the 10 pronouncements, Aseret HaDibrot, which King James called the 10 Commandments. Those two tablets, as you remember, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, came down from Mount Sinai with the tablets, saw that the golden calf disgrace was going on, hurled the tablets to the ground, or the tablets dropped from his arms, depending on which commentary opinion you follow. Those tablets broke. Talmud says that God said, Yashir kochacha, you did the right thing, Moses. And then after 40 days, Moshe Rabbeinu went back up to Mount Sinai and atoned for the nation. Atoned for the nation, and the nation itself atoned, and God gave him another set of the tablets that he brought down. So there were the Shivrei Luchot, there were the tablet shards, the broken pieces, and then there were the two whole tablets. According to the tradition, both sets of tablets were in that ark. The broken tablets from the first and the full tablets. Again, you see why it was forbidden to touch that ark, that holy ark. Shivrei Luchot, the Munachin Ba'aron. And so the Talmud discusses that the broken tablets, from where does Rabbi Meir derive that the broken pieces of the first set of tablets are placed in the ark? And he cites a verse that we're not going to get too deeply into, but in 1 Kings, it talks about that it was there. And beyond that, they cite our chapter that I just read from now, chapter 6, verse 2, where it says, whereupon he called the name of the Lord of hosts that sits on the cherubs. That's the ark that they brought. Teaches that both the second tablets and the broken pieces of the first tablets were placed in that ark. So that's what we had read here in chapter 6, verse 2. David and all the troops that were with him set out from Baalim of Yehuda to bring up from the ark of God, to which the name was attached, the name Lord of hosts, then thrown on the cherubim, on the keruvim. So that was number one. Brings us to number two. Furthermore, in Talmud Menachot, folio 99a, Tzadi Tet Amud Aleph, it says, Asher Shibarta v'samtem ba'aron, Tani Rabbi Yosef Melamed haluchot v'shivrei luchot, munachin ba'aron. And there's a lesson from that. Having mentioned the principle one does not, they were talking about, in this Gemara, the actual context is, they're not talking about the tablets. Rather, they're talking about when something is holy, we do not ever reduce its sanctity later, even when it no longer is like, let's say it's worn out. We still treat it with respect. A page of Torah, a page of a prayer book, a whole prayer book, when it's worn out, we don't toss it in the garbage. We bury it. We treat it with respect. A piece of paper with God's name on it. Can't throw it out. You have to bury it. You have to treat it with respect. An old tallis, a prayer shawl that's too worn out, you don't just throw it away, you bury it. We do not take things that are old and worn out. If they were holy, it never loses holiness. Like the first two tablets. Of course, they were so holy, the 10 pronouncements, then they were broken, had to be replaced by God. Nevertheless, the first ones never lost their holiness, even though they were sort of quote unquote obsolete. They no longer had their value in a way. They never reduced in holiness. Having mentioned the principle, the Talmud says in Menachot 99a, having mentioned the principle that one does not downgrade in matters of sanctity, the Gemara cites a related issue. The verse states, at the time the Lord said to me, Moshe, Moses was talking in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 1 to 2. After he's looking back in Deuteronomy on the 40 years the Jews were in the wilderness, shortly before he's going to die, and he's reviewing with the nation all that they have experienced over the past 40 years of wandering. And he now reminds them when the tablets were destroyed, and he atoned for the nation after the golden calf, and God said, okay, hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first. All right, we'll do it again. Only the first time I, God Almighty, hewed the tablets from the stone and wrote on them with my own finger, the finger of God. This time, I'll still write it on it with the finger of God, but it will have to be a human and not a divinity, not my divinity, that will initially carve out from the rock 2 tablets on which I write. So Moshe is saying, he said to me, hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. Rav Yosef teaches a baraita. This verse teaches that both the tablets of the covenant, the ark of the covenant, and the pieces of the broken tablets are placed in the ark. That's why I've been teaching you in tonight's class that this Aron Kodesh, this Aron Brit Hashem, Ark of the Covenant of God, that they were bringing up to Jerusalem, contained both sets. How do I know? It's from the learning in Masechet Menachot, in this tractate, and the one I just taught you in Bava Kama, Bava Batra. Okay, and furthermore, as an aside, the Talmud teaches in another important lesson. You know how I told you that an old worn-out talit is not thrown away but buried? An old worn-out prayer book is not thrown away but buried? In the same way, a great, great Torah scholar or a great, great righteous person who reaches a point in his life when he no longer has it, if he truly is great, and I don't want to get into contemporary politics, we're talking about a great Torah scholar, a great person, great righteous person, and then, God forbid, he starts to lose it towards the end of his life. We still treat him with the same respect we gave him or her at the height of his place. One should learn from here that with regard to a Torah scholar who has forgotten his Torah knowledge due to circumstances beyond his control, like illness, but we're talking about a Torah scholar, not a 2-bit politician, one may not behave toward him in a degrading manner. As he's walking by, you stand up out of respect, even though he doesn't know you're there. Because of what he once was, he's like those broken tablets. He's like that same ark holding the broken tablets. Although the first tablets were broken, it is prohibited to treat them with disrespect due to their sanctity. A Torah scholar who forget the Torah knowledge he once possessed is likened to those broken tablets. Just a little bit more. So we learned in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 7, we were commanded by God, right? The first 5 books of the Torah is not just prophecies, but it's God's holy word to Moshe. And Moses then wrote down God's holy word. But the Torah is God's holy word. And God taught in Numbers 7, we just read it in shul like 2 weeks ago, Parshat Naso, V'livnei kahat lo natan, ki avodat HaKodesh aleim, ba'katef yisau. Each of the 3 Levite families, Gershon, Merari, and Kahat, were given particular assignments with regard to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and all of its accoutrements, the menorah and the shulchan, the table on which the showbreads were, and the ark and everything. As far as carrying the ark, because remember that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, constantly was being carried from place to place, because whenever the cloud of glory above the camp started moving, that was a sign to the camp below, it's time to start traveling, following the cloud till it reposes at a new location. And then you'll encamp there. And as you do that, the ark goes with you. And how will it be carried? Not on a wagon. To the Kahatites, He did not give any other assignments, since theirs was the service of the most sacred objects. Their carrying, give me this order. Their carrying was by shoulder. It was obligated that the Aron had to be carried by shoulder. Likewise, it says that where God was commanding in Exodus, Shmot 25, Chafei, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among, exactly as I shall show you. So shall you make it. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, etc., overlay it with pure gold, etc. Cast 4 gold rings. I said brass rings earlier, I meant gold. We said that at the beginning of class when I showed you the picture, 2 rings on each side. Let's see if I could quickly, I don't want to lose it. Remember how I showed you the picture? So there were 2 rings, 2 gold rings on each side, and the moat, the rod went through the rings so that it could be carried that way. So we had just learned that. Let's just find that spot. Okay. So you'll put the rings, cast 4 gold rings to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one side, one of its side walls to any others. Then make poles of acacia wood, which you overlay with gold. Even though it's wood, it'll be covered in gold. And insert the poles into the 4 rings on the 2 on one side, 2 on the other side, for carrying the ark. So by God's command, the ark had to be carried, not transported on a wagon headed by bulls. And this is a very important takeaway by which we conclude tonight. The holiness and sanctity of these sacred items, like I said at the beginning of class, you're not allowed to touch the Torah. You're not supposed to put your finger in the Torah when you're reading it. You have to use that metal handle with it. If you have the money, you buy one out of silver. Otherwise, out of chrome to make it look like silver. And it's got the finger pointing. And that's what you use the etzba or the yad. Not supposed. What if you do touch it? Look, it's not the tablets of the 10 pronouncements, and it's not like it's a punishment. But it's not supposed to be. It's not allowed. What happens if, God forbid, a Torah scroll is dropped? It could be very heavy. What if it's dropped? No one's going to die, but there has to be 30 days of fasting. And there's a debate. Is it that the guy who dropped it has to fast 30 days? Obviously not consecutively, but is it that he has to find 30 days over the year? Or can we say that everyone in the congregation at the time it dropped can split it up among them? If there were 30 or more men, then 30 can take a day each. Or if there were 15 men in the shul, each has to take 2 days. But there has to be a fast. I mean, can you imagine that? Even a Hebrew book, not like a book of Hebrew literature, not like Shakespeare or Harry Potter translated into Hebrew, but a religious book, like what I'm reading from online, Navi, like a Chumash, if you drop that book, you have to kiss it. I remember, I never thought about it. I knew from boyhood, I knew that rule, and from time to time, you drop a book. It happens. You drop something. I never really gave it much thought because it's so ingrained in me. One time, there was that 10-year period that I found myself outside my natural environment practicing law. And I was at a major law firm. It's either Jones Day or Reagan Gump. I don't remember which one for this. But somehow, I always had a prayer book, a sitter, in my office to daven the afternoon prayer, mincha, to daven Mariv, the evening prayer. And unfortunately, at Jones Day, there were plenty of times I had to work all night. We used to call the place Jones Day night and weekends. And there were times I had to have my tefillin there also for the morning. And so I always had it on my desk. I don't remember the context. One time, a partner walked in to assign something, and I got up at attention, and I pulled something, and I dropped, and the sitter, I actually knocked the sitter off my desk. And I picked it up, and I put it down. I picked it up, put it down. Didn't even think twice about it. And he looks at me, he says, "Did you just kiss that book?" I said, "Yeah, I guess, yeah, of course." "You kissed the book?" "Yeah. What else do you kiss?" I just was taken by surprise. It's like, I didn't even think about it. A Jew kisses holy items. If a tallis would fall, I'd kiss it. Tefillin also you have to fast. I mean, yeah, we treat holy things holy. And if I would drop accidentally, like the Code of Federal Regulations or the United States Code, or I don't know, I wouldn't kiss it. I'd pick it up. There are rules for a book, a holy book. You have to kiss it. When you close the holy book, you're not supposed to close it from the back to the front. You're supposed to, even if it's inconvenient, you have to turn it around. You're at page 890 out of 895 pages. It's simple, just close the book. Got to turn the book around. You always have to close it from the front. That's a rule. There's even a rule of the order of books. I don't know. I don't think you could easily see it here, but I have I have a stack, and the Chumash, those are on top. Then the Navi, the books of the prophets, then the Rambams, and then the Siddur. I mean, it's like a whole rule. There's a whole hierarchy, and that's the context of chapter 6, which will continue, God willing, next week. Yes, Jen?
Also, holy, we kiss the mezuzah.
We
Another
kiss the
example.
mezuzah.
And then more confusion for me, maybe not for everyone else. When did Hashem allow the ark to be moved from Shiloh?
Oh, good question.
And how did it end up in someone's personal house without Kohanim attending to it? Since you say this, these people weren't even Levi'im, the sons. So then how could the father be a Kohen to attend to the ark?
Very good. So first of all, when the Jews came in across the Jordan River under Joshua, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, ended up at Shiloh for 369 years. It's the longest place it was before ultimately the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. After that, the Mishkan was moved a few times. It was to the city, the holy city of Nov, where the Kohanim had been. There were about 3 cities that it went to in different times for different reasons. And then eventually we have the point where it goes towards Jerusalem. Oved Edom, with whom the ark was left after this tragedy of Uzzah, was a Levi. It could not be left with anyone other than a Levi. A very good question. And it was then afterwards that David would figure out, what am I going to do? But it was life or death. The first thing he had to do in his mind was, I've got to get it out of everybody else's hands before it starts killing more people. Everybody, thanks for being here. And we'll take off on Thursday night, 2 days after the Independence Day. And we'll then, God willing, reconnect on Sunday and then next Tuesday, etc. Bye-bye, and happy 4th of July.